The sound of the captain's announcement barely registered as the plane descended. My nails dug lightly into the fabric of the worn duffel bag on my lap, the same one I had carried since my early 20s. It wasn't that I couldn't afford better luggage. God knew I could buy 100 of them without blinking. But there was something comforting about keeping this battered companion close, especially today as I flew back into the small regional airport near Cedar Springs, the town I had left behind, with nothing but defiance and $200 in my pocket. The familiar ache of dread settled in my stomach. Family meetings always had a way of shrinking me, reducing me to the struggling middle child role they had scripted for me long ago. Even now, after years of building something extraordinary, I wasn't sure if I was ready to step back into that role or burn the script entirely. I glanced at the reflection in the airplane window. My hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, my sweater had a faint hole near the cuff, and my sneakers were worn enough to suggest years of faithful use. I looked exactly how they expected me to look, ordinary, modest someone living paycheck to paycheck. That was by design. My assistant Margot had almost begged me not to do this. "You're worth 50 million, Cynthia," she had said, staring at my deliberately plain packing choices. "And you're going to show up like a college student on break." She didn't understand. Or maybe she did, but couldn't feel the sting the way I did. My siblings had never once asked how I was really doing, never shown curiosity about my work. They had simply decided who I was, the sister who couldn't quite keep up. In their world, James was the Ivy League star, Stephanie was the social princess, and I was the one fumbling through life with cute little projects. If I arrived looking any different, they'd sense something was off. And I wasn't ready for the reveal. Not yet. The plane jolted onto the runway tires, squealing. My chest tightened as I thought about the house I was flying toward. The white colonial with blue shutters hadn't changed in decades, but everything inside it had. Mom's broken hip, Dad's dementia. Their fragility had become the catalyst for this so-called family summit. James had made it sound like charity when he called, "We'll all contribute what we can. Even a small amount from you will help." His tone carried that same mix of pity and judgment I had heard my entire life. As the taxi wound through Cedar Springs, every street corner carried a ghost of memory. The ice cream shop where James had once treated me like a tag-along nuisance. The park where Stephanie and her friends whispered about who would win homecoming queen while I sat on a bench scribbling ideas for a small business. The hardware store Dad used to visit every Saturday, always with James in tow, as if apprenticeships in manhood skipped me entirely. I felt like a ghost myself, slipping back into a town that had frozen in time. When the cab stopped in front of the house, I froze. The maple tree still cast its massive shadow across the yard, the flower bed still meticulously tended by Mom when her body had been stronger. For a heartbeat, I was 10 years old again, clutching a report card with straight A's, hoping for more than a distracted nod of approval. The longing hit me harder than I expected, a deep ache for validation I had long pretended I didn't need. Before I could knock, the door swung open. James stood there tall and polished in a cashmere sweater and pressed slacks. Even at home, he dressed like he was minutes away from a board meeting. He glanced at his watch before looking at me fully. "Finally," he said, as though I had already inconvenienced him. "Did your flight get delayed, or did you have to take the bus from the airport?" His eyes flicked over my faded jeans, my scuffed sneakers, my old duffel bag. A small, satisfied smile tugged at his lips, the kind people wear when reality matches their assumptions. "Good to see you too, James," I said evenly, forcing myself to lean in for a hug. His arms were stiff, his cologne sharp and sterile. "How are Mom and Dad?" "As well as can be expected," he replied, tone clipped, given the circumstances. He reached for my bag, his grip firm, but his eyes assessing. "You're in your old room. Nothing's changed there. Stephanie and Andrew arrive tomorrow. I've already been here since yesterday setting things up." I stepped inside, the scent of lemon cleaner and faint medication drifting from the living room. My father sat in his recliner, thinner than I remembered, his eyes unfocused, as if straining to place me. Mom was in the kitchen, moving gingerly with her walker, but when she saw me, her face lit up. "Cynthia, sweetheart," she said, reaching out with trembling hands. Her gaze flicked over me quickly, pausing on my sweater. She hesitated before offering a gentle smile. "You look healthy. Are you eating enough on your budget? You know you can always call if you need help with groceries." Heat flushed my cheeks. I swallowed back the sharp reply forming in my throat and instead hugged her carefully. "I'm fine, Mom. Tell me about your recovery. Are the doctors happy with your progress? We eased into conversation, but James hovered like a shadow, interjecting with medical terms and treatment plans. He had already compiled a binder naturally full of charts, facility comparisons, cost breakdowns. He spoke as though decisions had already been made. His subtext was clear: he was in charge. I was the extra body at the table, the one they'd thank politely for whatever crumbs I could toss in. The evening stretched with this rhythm. Mom tried to prepare dinner despite her pain. I offered to help, but James had already ordered an elaborate spread from a meal delivery service. We need proper nutrition, he said pointedly, as though anything I could make wouldn't measure up. The food was good: roast chicken, garlic potatoes, fresh bread, but every bite tasted like humiliation. Later, as I helped clear the dishes, James leaned casually against the counter. You know, he began, voice dripping with false kindness, if taking time off has been hard financially, I can help cover some of your expenses while you're here. No shame in needing a little support. I stared at the crumbs on the plate in my hands. My pulse thudded against my ribs. He thought I couldn't even afford to be here. He thought I needed him to carry me. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to throw open every secret ledger of my life and watch his smugness burn away. But instead, I breathed deeply and set the plate aside. Thanks, James, I said softly, meeting his eyes. I'll keep that in mind. He smiled, content in his assumption. That was the thing about being underestimated. It gave me power they couldn't see. But as I lay in my childhood bed that night, staring at the faint cracks in the ceiling, a familiar battle stirred inside me. Part of me wanted to keep playing their game, keep wearing the mask of failure just to avoid the storm. But another part, louder this time, wanted to rip the mask away and let the shock roll through them like a tidal wave. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Margot. Everything's arranged. Just say the word. I stared at the glowing screen, heart pounding. Tomorrow the family meeting would begin, and when it did, I had a choice: remain the disappointment they thought I was, or become the storm they never saw coming. The house felt both frozen in time and heavy with change. Every creak of the floorboards carried echoes of my childhood, the hurried footsteps to hide report cards, the hushed arguments between my parents behind closed doors. But now the air was infused with something else: medication, weariness, and the faint metallic scent of aging. I followed James into the living room where Dad sat in his recliner, thinner and paler than I remembered. His eyes, once sharp enough to catch every childhood lie, now drifted past me, as if searching for a memory just out of reach. Cynthia, he murmured finally, voice cracking. You came. Of course I did, Dad. I knelt by his chair, squeezing his frail hand. The skin was papery, his grip weaker than I wanted to admit. A lump rose in my throat, threatening to expose all the emotions I had armored myself against. He nodded faintly, but his gaze slipped again, lost in fog. James, standing nearby, quickly filled the silence. His memory is slipping faster than expected. I've been tracking his episodes' frequency, duration, severity. That's why proper care is non-negotiable. Always the executive, even here. In the kitchen, Mom fussed at the counter. I wanted to make lasagna, sweetheart, but the hip makes standing too long difficult. She sighed in frustration at her own limitations. You don't need to cook, Mom, I offered, stepping toward her. I'll do it. Remember my stir-fry. I can whip something together. Before she could respond, James slid in. I've already arranged a dinner delivery service. Balanced meals, organic ingredients timed to their needs. It's important they eat properly. The dismissal was subtle but clear. What I could cook wasn't good enough. He placed a hand on Mom's shoulder, guiding her gently to a chair as if she were fragile glass. No need to strain yourself, Mom. Let the professionals handle it. I forced a smile, biting back the sting. Of course. That's thoughtful. When the doorbell rang, James retrieved the bags with his usual efficiency. Soon the table was covered with roasted chicken, garlic, mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, artisan bread. The kind of spread that whispered cost. Mom's eyes widened. This must have cost a fortune, she said, placing dishes on the table. James, you're always so generous. James offered a modest shrug, the kind practiced in boardrooms. The firm had an excellent quarter. Besides, we should enjoy these family moments while we can. The message beneath the words was unmistakable. I provide because I can. Cynthia can't. We sat down together. Dad managed a few bites before drifting his fork, pausing midair, as if he had forgotten what came next. Mom filled the silence with questions that pricked like pins. You're still doing those little websites, Cynthia? How's that going? Enough to pay the rent. I swallowed hard, setting down my fork. It's going fine, Mom, I manage. James cut in smoothly, eyes never leaving his plate. I know a few people who need basic sites. It's nothing major, but it could provide steady income, more reliable than gig work. There it was, the first strike of the evening. Not cruel enough to cause outrage, but sharp enough to remind me of my place. Thank you, I replied evenly. I'll think about it. The truth that my so-called gig work had just been sold for millions sat on my tongue like a burning coal. One word, one slip, and the fire would spread. But I swallowed it back, choosing silence. Dad, in a rare moment of clarity, turned toward me. You're still in that little apartment, the one with the noisy neighbors. My chest tightened. That apartment was 5 years and 3 homes ago. I now lived in a penthouse with glass walls overlooking the city park. But what came out of my mouth was simpler. I have a comfortable place, Dad. Comfortable is relative, James muttered under his breath, but loud enough for the table to hear. Mom sighed wistfully. I just don't understand why you never finished college, sweetheart. You had so much potential. If you'd just gotten that business degree, you could have been successful like James, she added without malice. Just belief. I smiled tightly, my nails pressing crescents into my palm under the tablecloth. Different paths work for different people, Mom. True, James interjected, sipping his wine. But some measures of success are universal security, stability, the ability to provide for family. Those things matter. His gaze pinned me like a specimen under glass. Mom nodded approvingly. The conversation slid back to James's new promotion and Mom's recovery, while I drifted into my own thoughts. Every word from them was a reminder of the wall that separated us, their version of success versus mine. The irony was bitter. I could fund 5 lifetimes of security for my parents, but here I was still cast as the one who needed saving. When the plates were cleared, James stacked his binder of care facility research at the head of the table. Tomorrow morning, we'll review options. I've already narrowed it down to the top 3. His tone made it sound like a corporate strategy session rather than a family meeting. He didn't even glance at me when he said, I want you to have time to process the realities before we decide. Before we decide, not before we discuss. I stared at the neat stack of charts, the high-resolution photos of manicured lawns and smiling seniors. Each page was a statement. I make the choices. You nod along. The weight of unspoken words pressed against my chest. I wanted to shout that I could buy all 3 facilities outright, that I could hire the best specialists in the country, that my signature alone could guarantee our parents' future. Instead, I nodded slowly, the mask of compliance firmly in place. I'll be ready tomorrow. James leaned back satisfied. Good. We'll all sleep better knowing we're handling this responsibly. As we cleared the table, Mom patted my hand. Don't worry, sweetheart. Just contribute what you can. Every little bit helps. Her voice was kind, but it carved into me like a blade. Not because I couldn't contribute, but because she truly believed I had so little to offer. Later that night, as the house settled into quiet, I stood by the window of my old room. Outside, the maple tree swayed in the evening breeze, leaves catching moonlight like fragments of memory. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, the dutiful daughter in faded clothes, the one who had never quite measured up. But behind the reflection, I knew the truth, a truth that could shatter this entire house of assumptions with one sentence. The question that haunted me as I turned off the light was simple. When the time comes, will I reveal it gently, or let the storm hit full force? The next morning dawned with a brittle kind of brightness, sunlight cutting sharp angles across the familiar wallpaper of my childhood room. I lay awake before anyone stirred, staring at the ceiling where the faint water stain still resembled a crooked crescent moon. It was almost laughable this room hadn't changed in 15 years, yet I had. Or maybe I hadn't changed enough because lying here again made me feel 17 and cornered, bracing for judgment I could never escape. By mid-morning, the hum of a luxury car pulling into the driveway snapped the house into alertness. I heard Mom fussing from the kitchen. They're here, James, hurry. Make sure the good china's ready, and Dad calling faintly from the living room, though his words blurred into the air. James, already dressed in tailored khakis and a pressed shirt, moved with military precision like a general preparing for an inspection. Then came the unmistakable sound of heels on the porch. Stephanie always announced her presence before she spoke a word. She swept into the house in a cascade of perfume and designer fabric, her husband Andrew trailing behind, burdened with a cluster of glossy shopping bags dangling from both arms. "We're here," Stephanie declared, as if the family had been holding its breath, waiting only for her. She moved straight to Mom, air-kissing both cheeks with theatrical care. "Oh, Mama, you look so brave." And this house still the same cozy little nest. Her tone carried a saccharine sweetness, the kind that masked a blade. Andrew set down the bags with a relieved grunt. "Traveling with her means I'm just the pack mule," he joked, though his eyes darted to Stephanie for approval before he smiled. The parade of gifts began immediately. A bottle of rare scotch for Dad, a silk scarf from Paris for Mom, a leather portfolio for James. Each gift chosen with precision, designed to signal wealth and thoughtfulness. Then came my turn. Stephanie's smile flickered as though she had to remind herself I existed. From one of the smaller bags, she produced a gift card tucked into a tasteful envelope. "And for you, Cynthia," she said brightly. "I thought you could use this. A little something to help refresh your wardrobe, maybe for job interviews. They have great professional pieces there." She handed it to me with the confidence of someone bestowing charity upon the needy. The weight of the card in my palm felt heavier than its value. I lifted my eyes to hers. "Thank you," I said evenly, slipping it into my pocket. "That's thoughtful." Her relief at my compliance was almost comical. "Well, we all want to see you succeed." She patted my arm as though I were a child. "It's never too late to polish up." The humiliation burned hot and steady, but I smothered it with a practiced smile. The storm could wait. As we settled into lunch, Stephanie launched into her usual cascade of anecdotes. The recent fundraising gala she chaired, the new marble countertops being installed in their kitchen, the golf tournament Andrew had dominated at the country club. She painted their life as glossy and untouchable, every sentence a mirror angled back at herself. When the conversation drifted toward me, the tone shifted to one of patronizing curiosity. "And what about you, Cynthia?" Stephanie asked, swirling her wine. "Any exciting developments in, what is it you do again?" "We design business solutions," I replied vaguely, buttering a roll with deliberate calm. "Still freelancing." "Oh," she said, as though that explained everything. "Well, James knows people who could help. Don't you, James?" James nodded, spearing a piece of chicken. "Yes. A few small projects might give you stability, reliable income." The silence that followed pressed against my ribs. I wanted to slam my fork down to shout that their assumptions were laughably outdated, that my so-called freelancing had turned into something worth millions. But instead I chewed slowly, letting the weight of their ignorance settle like a cloak. Dad's voice broke the lull. "Are you still in that tiny apartment, Cynthia, with the noisy neighbors?" The room quieted as all eyes turned to me. I forced a smile. "I have a comfortable place, Dad." Stephanie laughed lightly, sipping her wine. "Comfort is relative, isn't it? Remember when Cynthia thought she was living the dream because she could buy name-brand cereal instead of generic?" The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it was sharp enough to sting. I smiled along, though the memory twisted inside me. They weren't laughing at cereal. They were laughing at the girl who had dared to measure success differently. The topic shifted to tomorrow's meeting. James explaining his detailed research on assisted living communities. Andrew chiming in about investment portfolios. Stephanie praising the exclusivity of one particular facility. They spoke in unison seamlessly, using "we" as if decisions had already been made. Occasionally, their eyes flicked toward me, soft with false sympathy. The unspoken message was deafening. "We will handle this. You can contribute what scraps you have." At one point, Stephanie tilted her head. "Of course everyone should contribute according to their means. We don't expect you to match us, Cynthia." "Whatever you can manage," James added, with the same tone one might use for a child's allowance. "Even a token amount will be appreciated." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. The humiliation was so complete it almost became absurd. I could have paid for the entire facility they were describing with a single transfer. I could have built an entirely new one. But here I was, playing the role of the poor sister they tolerated out of pity. "Thank you," I said softly, setting my fork down. "That's very generous of you." Stephanie smiled, pleased. "We just want what's best for Mom and Dad." James tapped his binder, already stacked neatly beside him. "We'll go through everything tomorrow morning. Premium care doesn't come cheap." As the conversation meandered back to Andrew's golf swing and Stephanie's gala gown, I leaned back in my chair, studying them all. They were so certain of their roles: James, the provider; Stephanie, the benefactor; Andrew, the polished financier; and me, the afterthought. But tomorrow, when the meeting began, they would discover the script had been rewritten, And for once, I held the pen. The morning light filtered weakly through the lace curtains in the living room, dust motes swirling in its glow. James had already transformed the space into a makeshift boardroom. His laptop sat open on the coffee table, a portable projector, humming softly, beaming a crisp PowerPoint slide onto the faded wallpaper, parental care options, and financial considerations. The title alone made my skin prickle. This wasn't a family gathering. This was a quarterly meeting chaired by James Parker, executive son. Stephanie and Andrew arrived promptly dressed in coordinated shades of beige that screamed polished casual. They perched together on the love seat, her pearls glinting, his watch flashing in the light. Mom sat in her usual armchair posture, stiff with pride, but eyes clouded with worry. Dad dozed faintly in the recliner beside her, stirring only when the sound of the projector whirred louder. I, of course, was relegated to the wobbly ottoman in the corner. No one said it outright, but the placement spoke volumes. The successful sat on cushioned thrones. The struggling daughter sat on furniture that barely held together. James cleared his throat with a gravitas that belonged more to a courtroom than a family home. Thank you all for being here. I've done extensive research on facilities that meet our criteria: quality, medical care opportunities for social engagement, and of course, proximity to family. He clicked to the first slide, an elegant complex with manicured lawns and white picket fencing. This is Brookhaven Manor. State-of-the-art memory care program, on-site, physicians, specialized activities. Costs $7, $200 per month, not including additional medical expenses. Mom gasped softly, covering her mouth. That's more than our entire monthly retirement income. James smiled reassuringly, as though her reaction were anticipated. Yes, which is why we'll need to step in as a family. Click. Another facility appeared on the wall, even more luxurious. Silver Pines Estates, renowned nationally, offers cultural excursions, gourmet dining, private therapy sessions. $9 and $800 monthly. Stephanie leaned forward, eyes glittering. I've heard of Silver Pines. They only take a select few. It would be perfect for Mom and Dad, so dignified. Andrew nodded sagely. The investment would be worth it. Comfort, quality, peace of mind. Click. The final option, Harborview Residences. This is the most innovative, continuing care community. Residents start in independent living apartments and transition seamlessly to higher levels of support. 2-bedroom unit with a garden terrace for Mom's flowers. $11, $200 monthly. Even I couldn't deny it sounded beautiful. The terrace detail felt like a blade turned toward me. James had done his homework down to our mother's love for gardening. Mom's eyes softened at the image. It looks wonderful. Dad, awake for once, squinted at the screen. Garden terrace, huh? I'd like that. His voice was faint but hopeful. James clasped his hands together, triumphant. It's clear Harborview is the best option. But then came the slide that made my stomach tighten, a tidy chart, numbers lined up with brutal clarity. This represents the gap between their retirement income and the actual costs. Roughly $3,200 per month. He paused, letting the figure hang in the air. We, as their children, will shoulder this together. Andrew leaned forward, tapping the chart. We've calculated contributions based on means. Stephanie and I can cover 40%. James can handle 45%. James nodded smoothly. That leaves 15%, or about $1 and $200 monthly for Cynthia. The silence was suffocating. Everyone turned to me. Their expressions weren't hostile, just quietly doubtful, the way you might look at a child asked to carry a bucket, clearly too heavy. Stephanie cleared her throat delicately. But if that amount is prohibitive, Cynthia, perhaps you could contribute in other ways. Visit more often, provide personal care. That would be meaningful too. James added tone, dripping with benevolence. We don't want to create hardship. Maybe $500 monthly would be more manageable for your budget. Stephanie and I could adjust to cover the rest. My nails dug into the ottoman's fabric, the threads pulling loose under my grip. The humiliation was surgical, delivered with smiles cloaked as kindness. How generous of you, I murmured, my voice steady, though my throat burned. We just want what's best for Mom and Dad, Stephanie said quickly, her eyes shining with self-righteousness. Dad stirred, blinking toward me. Do you even have steady work now, Cynthia? Last time you were between projects. The words cut deeper than any of James's charts. Dad wasn't trying to wound me. His dementia softened his tone, made it almost childlike. But his question laid bare the heart of what they all believed, that I had drifted through life aimless and dependent. Before I could answer, James pounced. Actually, I've been meaning to bring this up. My firm has an opening entry-level marketing. Salary's modest by our standards, but for someone in Cynthia's position, it would provide stability and benefits. Stephanie lit up, clasping her hands together. Oh, James, that's perfect. A real job, Cynthia. Benefits security. It could change everything for you. I stared at them, disbelief simmering just beneath the surface. A real job, benefits. They had no idea that I already employed hundreds of people, that I signed paychecks worth more than their yearly salaries. But I didn't correct them, not yet. Instead, I forced a smile. That's thoughtful of you, James. His chest puffed slightly, pleased with his own magnanimity. Stephanie reached over, squeezing my hand like she was offering me a lifeline. We'll get you back on track, sis. It was unbearable. The condescension was no longer subtle, it was suffocating. My siblings saw themselves as saviors rescuing the family screw-up from drowning. And the worst part, they were entirely sincere in their belief. Being comfortable and being secure are different things, Cynthia James continued his tone lecturing. At some point, you need to think practically. You can't couch surf and do freelance forever. Couch surf, I repeated, blinking. Well, Stephanie said, tilting her head, you mentioned roommates last time. And since you never invite us over, we assumed. Her words trailed, but the implication landed like a stone. They thought I was too ashamed of my living situation to show them. I wanted to laugh. My roommate was my house manager, a man who ran my penthouse with military precision, but explaining that would sound like bragging. And maybe that was the point. I had lived in their assumptions so long that any truth would sound like arrogance. So I said nothing. James adjusted his tie, clicking the projector to a slide with red bolded numbers. So, can you manage the $500 per month, Cynthia? We'd like to finalize today. The room stilled every eye on me, waiting for my inevitable admission of inadequacy. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. A single message from Margot, all set. 15 minutes. I rose to my feet. I need to make a quick call first. James frowned. Now, Cynthia, this is important family business. I was already walking toward the window, dialing. Hey, it's me. Yes, everything's set for today. Perfect. Arrival in 15 minutes. The front lawn will be fine. Thanks. I hung up, slipping the phone back into my pocket. Turning, I caught their confused stares. James's brows drew together. What was that about? Transportation, I said, simply settling back onto the ottoman. Let's continue. Stephanie gave a soft laugh. Another taxi, Cynthia. You're full of surprises. I smiled faintly, folding my hands in my lap. If only they knew what was about to descend from the sky. The projector clicked off with a soft hum, but the atmosphere in the room was anything but quiet. James closed his binder with a decisive snap, like a judge slamming down a gavel. Stephanie smoothed her skirt, her expression soft with self-congratulation, as though we had just solved world hunger rather than plotted our parents' future with cold arithmetic. Mom dabbed her eyes delicately with a tissue. I just don't want to be a burden, she whispered, her voice thin. James leaned forward, his tone all reassurance and authority. You won't be Mom. That's why we're here. We're going to make sure you both get the best care available. Stephanie clasped Mom's hand, nodding earnestly. Exactly. You've given us everything, we're just giving back. The tableau was almost sweet, almost noble, except that beneath it lay the quiet exclusion of me. Their language was telling we'll handle it. When it came to Cynthia, the struggling sister, I was a footnote, a minor player in the grand plan. James finally turned toward me, his expression practiced. So, Cynthia, about that contribution, can we lock in your portion at $500 per month? The words carried the weight of finality, as though my agreement was a mere formality. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let the silence stretch. My eyes drifted to Dad, who was staring at the blank projector screen with unfocused eyes, his lips moving faintly as if reciting a memory only he could hear. Cynthia James pressed sharper now. We really do need a commitment today. Before I could open my mouth, Stephanie jumped in with her syrupy tone. Don't feel pressured, sis. We know it might be difficult for you. Just do what you can. Even your time is valuable. Maybe you can handle more of the hands-on care visits, Andrew added, almost kindly. That could save costs. Not everything has to be financial, right? The humiliation settled over me like a shroud. My chest tightened with a familiar ache, the same one I'd felt years ago, at Christmas, when James had told me some people were meant to follow. The same ache from the night Stephanie gave me her hand-me-down blazer with the patronizing suggestion it might help me land something real. I forced my lips into a neutral smile. I'll consider what I can do. James exhaled as though the matter was closed. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied. Good. I'll handle the contracts with Harborview. Stephanie, you and Andrew can set up the initial transfer accounts. I'll email you the breakdowns tonight. Mom looked at me, then her eyes soft, searching for something. Sweetheart, you really should think about finishing your degree. It's not too late. You've always had potential. The word struck like a blow. Potential. Always potential. Never realization. Never enough. Stephanie patted my knee as though I were fragile. James is right about that marketing job. Stability would do wonders for you. Think of the benefits, health insurance, retirement contributions. It's never too late to grow up a little, Cynthia. The smile I gave her must have looked strange because her expression flickered briefly with unease. Grow up, I repeated softly, tasting the words like poison. James chuckled, mistaking my tone for resignation. You'll thank us later. Sometimes we all need a little push to get on track. I leaned back, fingers tightening around the edge of the ottoman until the wood creaked. My mind churned with images of the life I had built, conference rooms in Tokyo, late nights coding until dawn, my team cheering when our patent finally got approved. The day I signed the acquisition contract and saw the number that would change everything. And here I sat being told to grow up. Stephanie tilted her head, studying me. Do you even have a car anymore? I noticed you took a taxi yesterday. Andrew smirked faintly, though he quickly masked it. I have transportation arrangements that work for me, I said evenly. James raised a brow. So no. Not everyone needs material success to be happy, Mom interjected gently, trying to ease the tension. That's a convenient philosophy, James said under his breath, when material success seems out of reach. My heart hammered in my chest. 1,000 retorts rose in me, sharp as glass, but I swallowed them back. Not yet. Stephanie leaned closer, her perfume sweet but cloying. You know, Cynthia, you don't have to prove anything. We're family. We'll always take care of you. The irony was suffocating. They thought they were lifting me up, but in truth, they were pressing me deeper into the ground. I don't need to be taken care of, I said quietly. James gave a small, knowing smile, the kind that suggested he had already filed me under denial. Everyone needs a safety net eventually. That was the tipping point. Something inside me snapped, not loudly, not with fury, but with a cold, precise clarity. 10 years of swallowed pride of enduring their judgment in silence crystallized into one thought: they will never see me for who I am unless I force them to. I stood abruptly. Excuse me, I need to make a call. James scowled. Cynthia, we're not finished. I ignored him, stepping toward the window phone already in hand. My fingers shook, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of inevitability. Hey, it's me, I said softly when Margot picked up. Is everything ready? A pause, her calm voice on the other end. Perfect. Yes, the front lawn is fine. Arrival in 15. I ended the call, slipping the phone back into my pocket. When I turned, the room was silent. Stephanie's brows were arched, James's jaw tight. Andrew curious. Even Mom looked bewildered. What was that about? James demanded. Transportation, I replied calmly, settling back on the ottoman. Stephanie chuckled. Another taxi. Maybe splurge for Uber Black this time. I smiled faintly, folding my hands in my lap. Not exactly. For the first time all morning, the power shifted. They didn't know it yet, but I did. The storm was already on its way, its blades cutting through the air toward us. And when it landed, nothing in this family would ever look the same. The hum began faintly at first, a distant thrum that could have been a passing tractor or a storm brewing beyond the hills. But within minutes, the sound deepened, thickened, vibrating through the window panes until the china in the cabinet rattled softly. Mom frowned, clutching the arm of her chair. What on earth is that noise? Stephanie glanced up from her wine-glass, irritation flashing across her face. It sounds like a helicopter. Andrew stood moving to the window. His brows shot upward. Not just any helicopter. That's a private model. Sleek, expensive. James snorted, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. In Cedar Springs, doubtful. Probably some agricultural survey. But then the shadow swept across the lawn and the downwash from the rotors bent the maple tree nearly in half. Grass whipped flat in waves, curtains snapped violently against the glass, and the roar became impossible to ignore. Mom gasped, rising unsteadily. Are they allowed to land here? Should someone call the police? I stood smoothing my sweater as calmly as if I'd been expecting a delivery. No need, Mom. That would be for me. The room stilled. What do you mean for you? James barked, his voice raised to be heard over the chopping blades. Stephanie's mouth twisted into disbelief. Don't be ridiculous, Cynthia. You don't even own a car. Now you're claiming helicopters. Her laugh was brittle, but her eyes betrayed unease. I walked slowly to the door, every step deliberate. At the threshold, I turned back. Their stunned faces caught in a tableau of disbelief, James clutching his binder like a shield, Stephanie gripping Andrew's arm, Mom frozen mid-breath, Dad blinking toward me with rare focus as if clarity had cut briefly through his fog. You were right, James, I said evenly. I don't own a car. Their confusion thickened. I prefer other forms of transportation. Then I opened the door. The noise roared to life, filling the hallway, whipping my hair back. Outside, a sleek black helicopter had descended onto the front lawn, its polished frame gleaming beneath the midday sun. The pilot uniform crisp lifted a hand in acknowledgement. Mom's swayed eyes rolling back and collapsed into her chair with a faint cry. Mother Stephanie shrieked, rushing to her side. James stormed to the doorway, his voice a mix of anger and disbelief. What the hell is going on, Cynthia? I turned back to him, calm as stone. You asked how I could possibly know about an exclusive care facility not listed on your spreadsheets. I know because I funded it. The Westbrook Foundation is mine. That's absurd, James shouted, his voice cracking under the roar outside. You fund a foundation. You barely scrape by. Stephanie pressed a trembling hand to her chest, pearls rattling against her collarbone. Is this some kind of joke? Because if it is, it's cruel. I stepped closer, my voice low but cutting through the chaos. I assure you I am completely serious. The helicopter blades slowed, slightly idling, but the air still whipped around us, tugging at sleeves and hair, carrying with it the undeniable presence of something bigger than their carefully curated world. Andrew's banker's eye had locked onto the aircraft calculation flickering across his face. His voice steadier than the others carried curiosity rather than disbelief. That model runs well into the millions. And the pilot, he's yours. I nodded. The silence that followed was heavy, pierced only by the rhythmic chopping of the blades. Finally, James laughed, short, sharp, and bitter. What's next? Cynthia going to tell us you own an island? A yacht. No island, I replied with a small smile. Not yet, anyway. Stephanie's face twisted. This isn't funny. We're trying to make serious decisions about Mom and Dad's future and your... I am being serious, I interrupted, my voice firm. You assumed I couldn't contribute, that I couldn't even afford groceries. You were wrong. You never asked. You just decided who I was, and you clung to it because it was easier than facing the truth. The words hung there undeniable, even as James shook his head like he could will them away. Then, cutting through the noise, Dad's voice rose clearer than it had been in weeks. My Cynthia, he murmured, eyes fixed on me, glistening with something like pride. The room froze. Stephanie steadied Mom, who had fainted against the chair, fanning her face with trembling hands. James gripped the doorway so hard his knuckles blanched. Andrew watched silently, the corners of his mouth twitching, as if he almost respected what was unfolding. I stepped out into the wind hair whipping sweater pulling against me. The pilot opened the door of the helicopter, waiting. I turned back one last time. When Mom wakes up, tell her I'll be back in an hour. I think we should continue this conversation at my place. Their faces were portraits of disbelief. My place, I repeated calmly, as though the words weren't detonating in the silence between us. The helicopter can take all of us. And with that, I climbed aboard. The cabin swallowed me in leather and glass, the noise dampened by the headset the pilot passed me. Everything all right, Miss Parker? He asked, his voice professional but tinged with curiosity. Just family drama, I replied, settling into the seat as the ground pulled away beneath us. You know how it goes. He chuckled softly. Should I circle once or twice? Give them a little more time to process. I allowed myself a smile, the tension unraveling just slightly. Tempting. But no. Let's head straight to the estate. We'll be back for them soon enough. Below my childhood home shrank rapidly. The lawn scarred by rotor wash, my family still clustered in the doorway like statues, frozen, bewildered, broken out of the script they had written for me. The town stretched out beyond it, small and unchanged. But I had outgrown it. I had built a world they couldn't imagine, and now that world had landed on their front lawn blades, turning demanding to be seen. For the first time in years, I felt taller than the shadow of that maple tree, taller than the weight of their judgment. I was no longer the sister they pitied. I was the storm they never saw coming. The helicopter descended smoothly onto the helipad carved into a manicured stretch of green. As the rotors slowed, the landscape of my other life unfolded beneath us. The sprawling stone facade of the main house, tall windows glinting in the sun, a lake stretching like glass just beyond the gardens. It wasn't ostentatious in the way of Stephanie's marble countertops or James's Hamptons retreat. This was different. Elegant, intentional. Every detail. Whispering permanence. I watched their faces as the cabin door opened. Mom clutched her purse as though it might anchor her to sanity. Dad's eyes widened clarity, flickering like a candle as he took in the grounds. Stephanie's mouth fell open. She looked like a magazine model caught mid-shoot, pearls glistening as her jaw slackened. James blinked rapidly, as if he could erase the image and redraw it into something that made sense. Andrew the banker was the first to recover his eyes, scanning calculating square footage market value staff costs. "Welcome to my home," I said, simply gesturing toward the grand entrance. Mom's voice broke first. "Yours." "Yes," I answered, my tone calm, but edged with finality. 6 months ago, I purchased the estate when I decided to open a regional office nearby. Regional office of what? James's voice cracked on the last word. His grip on his leather binder looked almost desperate. I led them through the entrance. The door swung wide to reveal a soaring foyer, a crystal chandelier, casting prisms across the marble floor, a staircase that curved upward with quiet grace. The smell of polished wood and fresh lilies hung in the air. "My company," I said, "Parker Security Solutions." James froze mid-step. "Your company?" "Yes." I turned, letting the words land. "I founded it 8 years ago. We design cybersecurity systems for small and mid-sized businesses. 6 months ago, Nexus Technologies acquired us for just over $50 million. The silence that followed was thick, fragile. Stephanie looked pale, her hand tightening around Andrew's arm. Mom swayed slightly, her knuckles white against her purse. Dad sat heavily on the nearest chair, staring at me with new light in his eyes. James finally found his voice. 50 million. Yes. I folded my arms, steadying myself against their disbelief. And I still lead the division, with equity. Stephanie swallowed hard, color rushing back to her cheeks. But why didn't you say anything? All these years we thought you let us think. That I was failing, I finished for her voice even, struggling, barely scraping by. Yes. I let you think it because it was easier than trying to explain. Because every time I brought up my work, you dismissed it as a hobby, a phase. Because you never asked. Not really. James bristled, anger rising now that denial had cracked. You made us look like fools. I didn't make you anything, I countered, meeting his glare. You made assumptions. You built a narrative that suited you, that I was the screw-up, the cautionary tale. You never challenged it because it made you feel safe. Stephanie's voice trembled. That's not fair. We worried about you. I arched a brow. Worried. You gave me a gift card for job interview clothes yesterday. You weren't worried, you were comfortable believing I had failed. It validated your own choices. She flinched, eyes darting to Andrew for support, but his gaze stayed fixed on me. Andrew cleared his throat, breaking the tension. The Westbrook Foundation, he said carefully. The care facility you mentioned. That really is yours. I nodded. I founded it 3 years ago, after our first major funding round. Innovative memory care, holistic elder support. And yes, I've already arranged a trust that guarantees Mom and Dad's expenses are covered. Permanently. James staggered back a step, his voice low, almost a whisper. You did all this. Without us. I did it because I knew what would happen if I told you. I drew a breath steady and sharp. You'd demand to control it, question my decisions, treat me like a child playing with toys. And today proved I was right. Mom finally found her voice, tears streaming freely. Cynthia, we never meant to hurt you. Perhaps not intentionally, I said softly, but every time you patted my hand and said potential, every time you offered me charity disguised as kindness, every time you overlooked my voice in family decisions, you made it clear. I wasn't seen. I wasn't believed. Dad's voice trembled, but it cut through the silence like a bell. I always knew you were special. He reached out, his eyes shimmering with lucidity. Different, yes, but special. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. Thank you, Dad. The staff appeared discreetly, Margot with her tablet, Chef Thomas ready in the dining room. Stephanie's eyes darted around, taking in the quiet efficiency. For once, she was speechless. James's jaw tightened. So this is why you dressed like that. The old sweater, the taxi. You wanted to humiliate us. No, I said firmly. I dress like that because it's how you see me. Because I wanted to know if you'd ever ask, really ask about my life. And you didn't. You just confirmed the story you'd already written. The marble foyer echoed with silence. My words hung in the air like shards of glass, sharp enough to cut, impossible to ignore. Stephanie broke first, her voice fragile. I was trying to help. I shook my head. No. You were trying to reinforce the narrative, that I was struggling, that you were thriving, that I needed your guidance. Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, her practiced composure faltered. James opened his mouth, then closed it again. His face was pale, his usual certainty stripped bare. I gestured toward the living room, where folders sat neatly stacked on the table. In those portfolios, you'll find the details. The trust I've established for Mom and Dad, the contracts already secured with Westbrook. Everything handled, not as charity, not as pity, but because I love them. The words landed with finality, and I felt the air shift. No longer was I the afterthought on the ottoman. The center of gravity in this family had shifted, and I wasn't sure they were ready for it. Stephanie sank onto the sofa, her hands trembling. James remained standing, binder still clutched like a shield, but his posture sagged under the weight of his unraveling certainty. Mom wiped her eyes, whispering through her tears, "My Cynthia." For once, no one corrected her. The silence in the living room was so dense it seemed to press against the walls, as if the house itself was holding its breath. My words, my revelations had detonated like glass, shattering across the marble floor. For once, no one moved to sweep it up. James' paste binder clutched tight, his eyes darting from me to the window and back again. Stephanie sat rigid, her pearls askew, mascara smudged just slightly beneath her eyes. Mom and Dad watched quietly, their expressions a blend of awe, confusion, and something more tender recognition. It was James who broke first. He dropped the binder onto the coffee table with a thud that echoed like a surrender. His shoulders slumped. When he spoke, his voice lacked its usual executive authority. "I owe you an apology," he said, staring at the floor. "I made assumptions about you, about your choices, that said more about me than you." Stephanie blinked, startled. James Parker admitting fault was rarer than a solar eclipse. I folded my arms wary. "What do you mean?" He rubbed a hand over his jaw, sighing deeply. I followed the path that was expected: prestigious school, corporate ladder, corner office. On paper, it's flawless, but the truth. He laughed, but it was hollow. I hate at least 60% of my life. The politics, the endless meetings, the image management. I did everything right according to our parents' definition of success. And I'm miserable more often than I'll admit. The confession landed heavy in the room. James had always seemed untouchable, perfectly polished, perfectly in control. To hear the cracks in his armor was disorienting. Mom sat forward, eyes wide. "James, you never said." "Because admitting it would mean admitting maybe I chose wrong," he cut in. His gaze flicked to me, raw. "So when you took a different path, I needed you to fail. Your success. It threatens the story I tell myself about why I keep doing what I do." The honesty left me breathless. For years, I had painted James as arrogant, condescending, smug, and he was all those things. But beneath it, there was something I hadn't seen: fear. Before I could respond, Stephanie spoke, her voice trembling. "I feel the same way." Every head turned. She fiddled with her pearl necklace, twisting it until the string looked dangerously close to snapping. "My life looks perfect. The galas, the country club, the Instagram posts. But Andrew and we've been in counseling for a year. The image is exhausting. Half the time I feel like I'm performing for an audience that doesn't even care." Andrew reached for her hand, steady, quiet. "It's true," he admitted. "We've built a life that looks impressive from the outside, but it's shallow. We're starting to realize we've been measuring success with the wrong ruler." Stephanie's eyes filled. "So when you showed up, Cynthia, still living, simply still yourself, I needed to believe you were failing. Because if you weren't, if you were actually thriving, then what did that say about the choices I made?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly she looked less like the golden child and more like the girl I remembered crying in her room after not making cheer captain. The room felt fragile, every confession another fissure in the polished facade of our family. I sat slowly absorbing it all. All this time I said quietly, "I thought you judged me because you believed I was beneath you. But really, you needed me to be beneath you." James sank into a chair, exhaling hard. "Exactly." Stephanie nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. For the first time, I didn't feel smaller in their presence. I didn't feel like the invisible middle child. Instead, I saw them, really saw them, as flawed, frightened human. I swallowed the weight of my own guilt pressing forward. And I need to confess something too. All eyes turned to me. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. I kept my success hidden partly to protect myself, but also, yes, I wanted to punish you, to prove you wrong, to hold it over you waiting for the perfect moment to watch you choke on your assumptions. The admission left me raw, exposed. That was petty, and it didn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. Watching Mom faint, seeing your faces, it didn't heal me. It just hurt in a different way. The room was quiet, save for Dad's steady breathing. His eyes clearer than I had seen in weeks, fixed on me with surprising sharpness. Walls protect, he said slowly, but they also trap. His words hung in the air, simple but profound. Mom's hand covered mine, trembling. We should have believed in you, she whispered. We should have trusted that your path mattered. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Emotion tightened my chest. For so long I had dreamed of those words. Hearing them now, I realized forgiveness wasn't instant, but the door had opened. James broke the tension with a humorless laugh. So we're all frauds then. I'm the corporate golden boy who secretly hates his life. Stephanie's the socialite drowning behind a smile. And Cynthia, the one we thought was failing, turns out she was the only one who knew what she was doing. No, I corrected softly. I was just hiding it better. Stephanie sniffled, dabbing at her eyes. Maybe it's time we all stop hiding. Her words carried a weight none of us could dismiss. For the first time in years, the three of us sat together without roles, without armor. Just siblings, vulnerable and messy. Andrew leaned forward, his voice steady. So what now? I glanced around the room, the binder on the table, the trust documents waiting. The faint smell of lilies drifting from the foyer. Now I said we figure out how to move forward. Together. Honestly, no more masks. The words felt daring, almost impossible, but judging by the flickers of relief on James's and Stephanie's faces, maybe they were ready too. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of the estate, painting the living room in golden light. For the first time in decades, the silence between us didn't feel like a chasm. It felt like space, open, tentative, ready to be filled with something new. Margot entered discreetly with a silver tray. Lunch is served in the dining room. She announced, her professional smile, steady though. Her eyes flicked curiously to the unusual sight of my entire family, seated together, subdued and vulnerable. As we moved into the dining room, Chef Thomas's spread awaited us. Roasted salmon, fresh asparagus, artisan bread, delicate desserts, arranged like jewels. Stephanie paused in the doorway, visibly stunned. You have a personal chef? She whispered. Yes, I said simply, but today he's cooking for all of us. Please sit. We gathered around the long mahogany table. Mom traced the edge of her napkin, hesitant, as if afraid to mar the perfection. I don't know how to sit in a place like this, she murmured. It's just a table, Mom, I assured her gently. It's us that make it family. That seemed to settle her, and she allowed herself a small smile. As we ate, the conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years. Mom asked about my travels, Stephanie about my projects. Even James, who had spent the morning looking like someone had upended his entire worldview, leaned in with genuine curiosity. So when did you know it would work? He asked. There wasn't a single moment, I replied, setting down my fork. We nearly went bankrupt twice in the first 3 years. I worked 18-hour days, lived in a studio with a leaking ceiling, survived on ramen. But eventually we patented a system that changed everything. It wasn't magic. It was persistence. Stephanie stared at me, her eyes shining. And you never asked for help. I laughed softly. Every offer of help from this family came with a condition that I admit I was wrong, that I return to the path you thought I should take. I couldn't accept that. I needed to prove to myself, most of all, that my path was valid. Andrew nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Respect, he said simply. The weight of that word, spoken by the family outsider, carried more sincerity than any compliment I'd ever received from James or Stephanie. Mom reached across the table, her hand trembling as it covered mine. We may never undo the hurt, Cynthia, but we can start fresh, if you'll let us. I swallowed against the tightness in my throat. I'd like that. The afternoon stretched into stories, James recounting his first humiliating failure at work. Stephanie laughing through tears, as she admitted some of her Instagram posts were staged illusions. Me sharing small pieces of the world I'd kept hidden. There was no grand reconciliation, no dramatic hug that erased the past, just the quiet beginning of honesty. Later, I led them on a tour of the estate. We wandered through the gardens, the scent of roses mingling with the crisp air. Dad walked slowly, leaning on me for support, his eyes bright with wonder. "You built all this?" he said, his voice thick with awe. "With help," I corrected softly. "No one builds anything alone." He squeezed my arm, his gaze clearer than it had been in weeks. "Still proud of you, girl." The words cracked something in me. Pride, simple, unconditional, unburdened by comparisons. It was what I had chased all my life, disguised in the armor of success. Hearing it now fragile and fleeting, though it was, felt like victory. As evening settled, we gathered on the terrace overlooking the lake. The sky blazed with orange and pink, the water mirroring every flame. Stephanie sighed, hugging her arms around herself. "I don't want to go back to our house tonight. Not yet. Can we stay here?" "Of course," I said. "The guest rooms are ready." James raised his glass of whiskey, the fire from the sunset glinting in his eyes. "You've done well, little sister. Not just the money or the house, but building something meaningful. On your own terms. That takes courage. I'm not sure I ever had it." "It's never too late to change course," I replied quietly. He gave a rueful smile. "Maybe I'll take that teaching position after all. Less money, but more meaning." Stephanie looked out at the water, her voice soft. "I want to do something real too. Not just galas and charity balls. Something that matters." Andrew placed a hand over hers. "We'll figure it out together." The conversation lulled into a comfortable quiet. For once, no one needed to prove anything. As the stars began to prick the sky, I sat back listening to the gentle murmur of my family. The storm had passed. The house was still standing different, cracked in places, but stronger for it. Later, when everyone retired to their rooms, I lingered on the terrace alone. The lake shimmered under the moonlight. The estate spread quietly behind me. My phone buzzed an email from Tokyo waiting for my approval. For once, I didn't rush to open it. True success, I realized, wasn't measured in millions or mansions. It was this, the possibility of authentic connection, fragile but real, the chance to be seen for who I truly was, not who they assumed I must be. I exhaled the night air, cool against my skin. For years, I had built walls high enough to keep judgment out. Now, perhaps it was time to build doors instead. The helicopter, the estate, the revelations, they were dramatic, yes, but they weren't the victory. The victory was this, sitting at the same table as my family, and for the first time in decades, feeling like I belonged there. And maybe, just maybe, they felt the same.